Hi. Hi, everybody. Hi to the people in the room and to anybody who is looking online. My name is David McNeil. I'm one of the organizers of the PAC committee, which organizes press events at this club, and a former board member. We are honored again to host a friend of the FCCJ, Tadatoshi Akiba. He is the former mayor of Hiroshima City. Well, we're all consumed, of course, by the horrific events in Ukraine, the war that's taking place. And what we have heard, of course, in the last couple of weeks is that the conflict is in danger of spiraling into nuclear war, which seems unbelievable in 2022. Akiba-san has leapt into action because of the fears that we all share. He's the former mayor, of course, of Hiroshima, as I said, and it was destroyed by an American bomb, a nuclear bomb, in 1945, and he is a long-standing peace activist. He is demanding that the Russian President, Vladimir Putin, declare he will not use nuclear weapons, and, of course, that nuclear weapons themselves be abolished. He's also called on Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida, who represents Hiroshima Prefecture, to engage more forcefully in the nuclear threats from Putin, and also, indeed, in his own party, there are people who want to host nuclear weapons in Japan. Akiba-sensei served for 12 years as the mayor of Hiroshima. Hiroshima is one of only two cities, of course, bombed by nuclear weapons. He stepped down in 2011. He hosted the World Summit of Nobel Laureates, attended by, among others, the Dalai Lama, Mikhail Gorbachev, Lech Walesa, and Willy De Klerk. He has a PhD in mathematics from MIT, and there's actually a mistake in the notice, which I'll just tell you now. He is not a Hibakusha. He's actually born in Tokyo. So my apologies. I was the person who wrote the notice. Thank you all for coming. Can I ask you, just people in the room, if you would turn off your mobile phone? Akiba-sensei is going to talk for a couple of minutes, and then we will have questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your kind introduction, David, and thank you for organizing this. And I'd like to thank you, Pio, for joining the organizers to do this. First of all, thank you for joining this important occasion, because I represent the voices of the Hibakusha, that's the survivors of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and many of them, even though they had passed away a long time ago, I can just represent their voices too, that nuclear weapons should never be used, and certainly the threat to use nuclear weapons should not be allowed either. And based on the sense of urgency of the Hibakusha, I started a signature collection campaign through the organization change.org, which is wonderful, because through this organization, just one individual could start a signature collection campaign and can spread it to the rest of the world. So a person is no longer weak by utilizing this mechanism wisely. As a matter of fact, I can prove it. I started the campaign at the beginning of March, and so far, the number of signatures that I have received is more than 90,000. So soon it'll be more than 100,000, and I hope that it'll grow to show how many people really are for non-use of nuclear weapons, for the abolition of nuclear weapons, and no first use either. So that's more or less the general sentiment. And this was started by President Putin's, threats expressed a few times, and we all actually shuddered. There are many reasons, and let me point out a few. One is that to use the threat of use of nuclear weapons is against international law. There are several pieces of international law that prohibits this. The 1996 advisory opinion by ICJ prohibits the threat of use of nuclear weapons, except in the case of a nation which is facing the existential threat from the outside. And certainly Russia at this point does not face that. So there is one. And a treaty on the prohibition of nuclear weapons that was created to fill the gap that the ICJ advisory opinion left unfilled also prohibits the threat of use of nuclear weapons. And actually, since it has taken effect, it is the international law that governs any actions related to nuclear weapons. Well, unfortunately, nuclear weapon states and other states have not signed or ratified, but still the fact is it's a piece of international law. That's very important. In addition, on January 3rd, the 5 nuclear powers issued a joint statement saying that their nuclear weapons are not targeted at each other or any other country. And President Putin certainly was a party to it, and he should abide by his pledge. So anyhow, these are some of the pieces. Now, however, strange thing is that the nuclear weapon states actually have not come up with any criticisms that I am telling you right now, because they are doing their business of deterrence theory-based policies of nuclear weapons as usual. One good example of this is the statement by Prime Minister Theresa May in 2016 when she answered a question by a Scottish National Party member, Mr. Caravan, asking if she would authorize the use of nuclear weapons that would instantly kill hundreds and thousands of women and children. Without hesitation, she said yes. And again, the nuclear weapon states did not criticize her action at the time. So the business goes on. So it's not strange from their point of view that the President Putin is threatening to use nuclear weapons. However, that's not acceptable from the point of view of the Hibakusha and also most citizens in the world. That is why I chose to start the campaign. Now the question is, why is it that the attitudes of nuclear weapon states leaders and Hibakusha are so antipodal to each other? And one reason is that the Hibakusha actually went through the living hell, the agony, the suffering, and despicable realities that they somehow managed to survive, while all others, including us, do not have this experience. And I'd like to emphasize the leaders of nuclear weapon states, including President Putin. So they talk about using or threatening to use nuclear weapons lightly. I'm saying the word lightly from the point of view of somebody who really understands the living hell. So one very good solution to all of this is that the leaders of nuclear weapon states visit Hiroshima and or Nagasaki. But it's not likely, probably, for President Putin to visit Hiroshima before he decides to push a nuclear button. So an alternative, although it is not the best alternative, is that Prime Minister Kishida, Fumio Kishida, visits President Putin and other nuclear weapon state leaders to show and to convey the passion and the conviction of the Hibakusha based on their real experiences and persuade them to declare that they will not use nuclear weapons, or at least agree to the no first use of nuclear weapons at this time. One reason that Prime Minister Kishida has the power to persuade all these leaders is that he is elected from the first district of Hiroshima, where the A-bomb stands and where the nuclear bomb in 1945 actually exploded. Epicenter is right above, his district of election. So that is another purpose we have for collecting this campaign. And I am a former mayor of Hiroshima, and perhaps because of that, because I represented officially the voices of Hiroshima citizens and the Hibakusha, many people consider my stand perhaps slightly, more carefully than a person on the street. However, if I am supported by, well, right now about 90,000, but let's make a thought experiment. Suppose 1 billion people agreed to my stance. Suppose 1 billion people actually signed my petition. That would have a significant impact, because then I'd be not elected, but I'd be representing 1 billion people on a single issue. In most elections, that there are many different issues that people choose a candidate. Maybe it's about economy, maybe it's about child rearing, maybe it's about cultural things, or the just the monetary policies. But in this signature, there is only one issue, that is, do not use nuclear weapons. So billion supporters saying that that's the right thing and telling the world that I represent that voice should have an impact. So with that, I can try to persuade leaders of nuclear weapon states, and also the technocrats and high priests of sort of deterrence theory to abandon their positions and join those of the people worldwide who really like to see a world without nuclear weapons. So that's basically what I have been doing, and I'll continue to do until, I hope, the conflict and the war will end within a short time.
Thank you very much. You used the word shudder. You said people shuddered when they heard this oblique threat from Putin. I think the Japanese for that would be zottosuru, is that right?
Yeah.
I think that's true, but I think some people in Japan didn't shudder, right? So, for example, Prime Minister Shinzo Abe, ex-Prime Minister Shinzo Abe, he went on TV after that threat and he said Japan should not treat as a taboo discussions on the reality of how the world is kept safe. He said that on national TV. And he was kind of urging Japan, wasn't he, to have a NATO-style arrangement, a nuclear sharing arrangement. I wonder if you could maybe just give your reaction to those comments.
Yes. I am a mathematician, so I try to look at the world rationally and logically. And so from that point of view, what one calls reality is very important. Depending on which axiomatic system you take, a reality is quite different. And his reality is totally different from those of the majority of people in the world, from the Hibakusha who went through the living hell, and also from those who'd like to see a future instead of just ignoring the fact that the nuclear weapons could wipe out the entire humanity. But there are more short-term analysis of what he has said. First of all, that he is not thinking about what actually happens if Japan really did have nuclear weapons. Okay, suppose Japan has nuclear weapons, and please remember that Abe is an advocate of first use of nuclear weapons. That is, using nuclear weapons when other countries really have not done so. As a matter of fact, when President Obama tried to adopt a no first use policy for the world through the United Nations and for the United States through its Congress, it is Abe who sabotaged, who stopped Obama's move. So that's why the United States dropped the idea of non-first use. But China has adopted non-first use since it first acquired nuclear weapons. Now, so when you look at the picture, what would you see? China has nuclear weapons, but says that I will not use it first. Then comes Abe saying that Japan will have nuclear weapons and we are going to use it first. I mean, that's a very good way to start a fight or maybe a war. And, well, quite often that's what Yakuza in Japan actually adopts as a strategy. So that kind of sort of conflict-causing rhetoric should not be lightly, again, expressed, and especially from the former Prime Minister. And look at North Korea and Russia as well. Okay, most Japanese want the so-called Northern Territory back to Japan, but Russia certainly would not do that if Japan has nuclear weapons because, well, if Japan has nuclear weapons and gets the Northern Territory, those nuclear weapons will be placed on those Northern Territory, well, right across the channel from Sakhalin. And so that would discourage Russia to even negotiate the return of the Northern Territory. And as for North Korea, which has been trying to acquire the ICBM so that it would be able to attack the United States mainland, but North Korea would not need to do that anymore because the American nuclear weapons will be on Japanese soil. So all you need to do is a crude missile that could hit the Japanese-American nuclear weapons on the ground. Now, of course, there are many other possibilities, but anyhow, trying to start a war, trying to provocate the neighboring countries, okay, will be the immediate consequence of Japan acquiring nuclear weapons. And that is something extremely stupid to even suggest. So anyhow, think about what would happen instead of advocating something without really thinking about it. Okay, this is the reality that we must consider.
Thank you very much. Right, we have a lot of questions lined up online. And then just a reminder to people who are looking at us today online, you can send in a question using the form on the FCCJ website. The first question is from Eric Johnson. He's the senior national correspondent for the Japan Times. He says, do you or the current mayors of Hiroshima and Nagasaki plan to extend a formal invitation to President Joe Biden to visit either city when he finally makes his first trip to Japan as American president? Okay.
Even before I became mayor of Hiroshima, which was 1999, I started in 1980s to ask American presidents and other leaders of nuclear weapon states to visit Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And finally, President Obama came. As a matter of fact, I invited him personally at the White House in 2010 to visit Hiroshima. Just among, well, the American Conference of American Mayors. And together with that group, I went to the White House and extended the invitation by shaking hands with him, and his answer was, yes, I'd like to come. So I was very pleased that the President Obama came. But at the time of his visit, I emphasized the fact that this is the first of many American presidents, visiting Hiroshima, and also the leaders of nuclear weapon states visiting Hiroshima. That is a must. As I mentioned before, the leaders who have nuclear weapons should know the reality. This time it's the reality in its true meaning of the result of atomic bombings. And you'll have to come to Hiroshima to understand that. And as a matter of fact, many people who are knowledgeable about nuclear weapons admit that they didn't know anything about what nuclear weapons could do and actually have done until they came to Hiroshima. Jack Lemmon, an Oscar-winning actor, was a very good example. He came in 1985. And he was the star of China Syndrome, the movie about nuclear power meltdown. So he did study very deeply. By the way, he has a Harvard degree in pharmacology, so he understands science very well. And so he told me that he knew enough about nuclear weapons in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. But then he continued. He didn't know anything about Hiroshima until I came here. And he also added that he was moved by the way Hiroshima citizens treated him as friends. And so everybody should come to Hiroshima. That's Jack Lemmon's recommendation. And certainly that I have been extending in my peace declarations several times, all the nuclear weapon states leaders to visit Hiroshima. So President Bush and Kim Jong-un and other leaders to Hiroshima. And certainly that stands. And I'm sure the incumbent mayors of Hiroshima and Nagasaki agree with me completely.
So there's a standing invitation to world leaders to come and visit, especially the leaders of nuclear powers. I'm going to look across the room just to see if anybody has a question. I see Pio's hand up. Anybody else, if you would like to ask a question to the ex-mayor, would you kindly put your hand up? Pio, onegaishimasu.
Good morning, Akiba-sensei. Thank you for coming to FCCJ again. I have actually a couple of questions. The first one is that we have recently heard, I personally heard it in Italy from a scholar, that when we think about nuclear weapons, we shouldn't think anymore to mass destruction weapons, but to the so-called local, tactical weapons, those that can be used for local effects, with effects not over 300 kilometers. What do you think about this idea? Second is Japan. You mentioned before the non-proliferation treaty, but as you know, Japan did not sign that. How do you feel as Japanese citizen, as former mayor of Hiroshima, and as citizen of the same city with Kishida, Prime Minister, about this fact? And the last one is about deterrence. You mentioned that you are appealing the nuclear powers to renounce to the nuclear weapons, but there is a very strong opinion that actually nuclear weapons did their job for 70 years now in deterring. So wouldn't you rather focus on the pledge by each and every country, you mentioned China until now, to pledge not to use the weapons for the first time? In my humble opinion, that would be more effective, probably.
Yeah. Okay, thank you very much. As for the so-called local or tactical nuclear weapons, when you analyze what they really are, well, they are usually, in its yield power, bigger than Hiroshima or Nagasaki bombs. So it's just a misnomer or to say tactical or local. Well, you could make an argument that Hiroshima and Nagasaki are local wars, but that local war was, from the point of view of those who experienced it, really the hell on earth and something that should never be allowed to happen again. So those rhetorics again should be based on the reality of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Okay, and as for Japan joining TPNW, I hope that Prime Minister Kishida, because as I mentioned, he's from Hiroshima, he would make that point a big issue within Japan, telling people that I'm from Hiroshima, so I have the historical duty, okay, to live up to the name Hiroshima and come around and work toward the abolition, including the signing and ratification of TPNW. That would leave him as a historic figure in Japanese politics, and I hope that he will become one. Instead of his efforts, which seem to be okay in many people's eyes, but I want him to be the hero because he represented Hiroshima to lead Japan into a great peaceful country and lead the world into peace. And as for the deterrence theory and TPNW as well, that I find it plausible, but even if Prime Minister Kishida or other leaders of nuclear weapon states, personally wish to sign and ratify TPNW, there may be some obstacles. The hurdle may be too high. So in that case, there is a way of lowering hurdles. And the lower hurdle in this case is the declaration of no first use. And no first use has a good chance of succeeding. First of all, China has adopted the policy already. I believe India also has adopted it. So there are countries who have done so. The second is, as I mentioned, President Obama tried, although failed. And in the United States, there is a substantial sort of portion of people who are for the non-forced use, although they do not necessarily advocate the abolition of nuclear weapons immediately. So why don't we go for the no first use first? And third, other nuclear weapon states also adopted this policy partially through the nuclear weapon free zone treaties. For example, Tlatelolco Treaty that covers Latin America and the Caribbean was signed by all the countries in that area, so they promised that they will not possess nuclear weapons. And 5 nuclear weapon states, US, UK, Russia, France, and China, agreed, by signing and ratifying the treaty that they will not attack these countries. Okay, so albeit it's within a limited region, these countries adopted the no first use policy. So there is a good chance that this policy will spread and will be adopted, and it's practical. So I believe that that's the first thing that we should do.
Thank you very much. We'll take another question from online. This is from Walter Sim. He is a correspondent with the Straits Times, which is a Singapore newspaper. Your position against the use of nuclear weapons is clear, but given that the ongoing oil crisis has led to talk in Japan about restarting nuclear power plants, for its energy self-sufficiency, while also keeping in mind that Russia attacked nuclear power plants in Ukraine. Could you discuss what you think would be the role of nuclear energy for Japan? So again, nuclear energy in Japan, despite Fukushima in 2011, seems to be making something of a comeback. I wonder if you could comment on that. Thank you.
Okay. Some of the scientific predictions that I know show that Japan will be sufficiently powered by, basically reusable energy sources. It may take a little more time, but the conversion to reusable energy sources is going more rapidly than anybody actually predicted. Even the, I guess, Keisansho, that's the Economic Industrial Ministry. Anyway, just since it became longer, I couldn't remember the exact name, but did admit that reusable energy source is advancing more rapidly. And I think we have a good chance to, 100% converting the energy sources to that. And another aspect is that, okay, even if you need something, you don't choose that if that kills you or if that, destroys your existence. If Japan possesses nuclear weapons, the danger is there. That's what I said before. But even without nuclear weapons, if other countries want to destroy Japan, all they need to do is to destroy nuclear power plants within Japan. There are 53 of them. So accuracy is no problem. You randomly shoot short-range missiles and destroy these nuclear powers, or send, spy-like, workers within nuclear power plants and destroy the electric sources and so forth. Anyway, any sabotage will trigger the destruction of nuclear power plants within Japan, and that would wipe out the entire Japan. So the immediate thing we should be concerned about is to how we can avoid that kind of danger by decommissioning, certainly, but decommissioning still will keep the radioactive substance at the site, and those radioactive materials being attacked certainly will pose a great deal of danger. So we'll have to come up with a solution for that as well. And experts, I'm sure, know the answer to that as well. So the question is not really to base our policies on needs alone. I think we need to think about survival, not in the direction that Mr. Abe is advocating, but in the way that we secure the true peaceful and environmental sustainable, and also that something that will bring a bright future for our children as well.
Thank you very much. I'll just scan the room to see if there's anybody who has a question for the mayor. But if you just want to put your hand up and indicate, then I can take a question. While we're waiting, I'll just ask a question, another question which is coming online. This is from Kaldon Azari, who is a former president of the FCCJ. The USA said that the 2 atomic attacks over Hiroshima and Nagasaki, while horrific, were justified because lives of millions of Americans and Japanese were saved. I'm sure you've heard this argument before. Some Ukrainians regret now they relinquished their nuclear weapons after the collapse of the Soviet Union in the early 90s. They say if they still had them, Russia would not dare to invade their country. According to Kaldon, some Arab countries say only nuclear weapons will end the Israeli invasion and occupation. I won't read the whole question, but you get the drift. It's that the Ukrainian invasion of Ukraine the sort of collapsing world order, if you like, around the world, has convinced some countries that actually they should have nuclear weapons, and they are going back to this old argument from Hiroshima and Nagasaki that it saved millions of lives. Would you care to comment on that, Akiba-sensei?
Yes, the part about the Hiroshima and Nagasaki situation, that needs to be corrected. It's wrong to say that a million lives had been saved. Okay, by the way, those numbers tend to increase as time goes by and as people forget the real point. The President Truman's announcement was only 500,000, and according to the historians who actually checked the war situation in 1945, for example, I think, Burton Bernstein of Stanford, he did the study in the 60s and 70s, and also the American Strategic Bombing Survey did the study right after the American occupation forces came to Japan. Japan was to surrender before November 1945, without the United States doing anything. For example, invasion of the mainland of Japan, that was quite often quoted. However, that wasn't necessary for Japan to lose the war. It's the lifeline, Japanese morale, and everything else combined. Japan was ready to surrender by November. So the best solution would have been that the United States simply sit there and wait, and that would have saved the lives. And Bernstein actually studied, and the number of soldiers that would have died if the invasion had occurred, that's in the order of 60 to 70,000 at most. Okay, so that's another study that was made at the time. So the presumption, the interpretation of what was happening around 1945. I should also add the name of Martin Sherwin, who was at Tufts University with me, who also did the study around that time. So anyway, those historians clearly say that the number of lives saved by the atomic bombs was not, up to par to the losses of the lives of people by 2 atomic bombs. And also the war was to end without the United States doing anything further. That's the result, the wisdom of humanity, doing historical sort of data collecting and logically reaching a conclusion. So, and by the way, although Hiroshima and Nagasaki casualties were very big, but conventional bombing, for example, killed many people. For example, since we are still in March, on March 10th, 1945, by the Tokyo bombing, 100,000 citizens died over one night. In the case of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, usually the death count is between August and December, but in the case of Tokyo, people died the night of March 10th, and the number is 100,000.
Thank you. Yes, it's often forgotten. The death toll from aerial bombing during the war actually was it's been estimated at about 500,000. That includes the 100,000 who died in Tokyo. I see Pio's hand up again. Again, if anybody wants to ask a question, put your hand up. I see Drini.
Well, allow me to follow up on your last answer, Mayor. There is another, since we are recollecting those times, there is another interpretation of the bombing of Hiroshima and especially of Nagasaki, which is the declaration of war of the Soviet Union and the fact that the Soviet army was close to enter Japan. How much important was this interpretation, in your opinion? Was it also one of the reasons to avoid, because by November, you mentioned November, but by November probably the USSR would have been reaching Hokkaido, and probably we would have Japan of the North and Japan of the South.
Okay, I'm not the historian, and what I'm telling you as historically accurate conclusions are those which are the results of just the good historians' conclusions, and I really don't know. I haven't really studied why and what around that time of Russian connection. Certainly, I mean, that had a factor on August 9th that the Soviet Union, just entered Manchuria. So that's certainly a factor. And also, I know that there has been speculation that Japan would have been cut into two halves, just like Korea. But I don't have a solid basis for sort of making any recommendation about this. But the American intention of preventing Japan to be split into two by threatening the Soviet Union with nuclear weapons, could have been a factor. Well, that sort of makes sense, but I don't know the facts surrounding that.
Thank you, Joini.
I am Suvendrini from University World News. My question is, I've just done a story about the impact of the Ukraine war on Japan's defense policy, and Japan is firmly behind the West. And some people, especially analysts in Hiroshima, view this Japan's position as basically not allowing Japan to have its own policy, of pushing a different, like a ceasefire or peace dialogue or something like that. What do you think?
Yes, I think that because Japan has the peace constitution and especially Article 9, and many people in the world share the concern of any war escalating into nuclear war or global war, and certainly during that process, many lives, and especially those of women and children, older people, are lost. And certainly, if a war escalates to a nuclear one, the devastation and the result would be intolerable. So, in that line of thinking, which I think is the common sense for the majority of the people, Japan should step in and show that the solution to all of this is to abandon war and abandon the war mentality of the people who advocate and who analyze and who offer half-truths as if they were the absolute truth. So Japan is in a very good position to be a mediator and to be a guiding spirit in order to make the world a better place. And I don't think that emphasizing the fact that Japan, might be attacked by neighboring countries And because of that, we should have nuclear weapons, or just strengthen our armed forces and so forth. That type of war mentality and the mentality by which war is treated as a game, that should not be the Japanese policy. And especially I would like to appeal to the young people who do not know the reality of war to, well, not study war by the games they play, which can be easily reset and nobody really is hurt. But I hope that they will understand Hiroshima and Nagasaki and other cities' tragedies that actually happened. And also I'd like to ask young people and old people as well to use imagination. I don't think that the world really understands the living hell of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, partly because the truth about Hiroshima and Nagasaki did not spread for 7 years, from 1945 to 1952, when Japan gained independence. No information about the atomic bombings came out of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Even the Hibakusha themselves had difficulty obtaining medical information about themselves. But reality now is different. We have the internet, we have the drones. Okay, at the time of the atomic bomb, people just didn't know there was radioactive effects. So they went into the bombed areas carelessly. But now we know, so people will not get into the highly radioactive areas after a certain place is bombed. But drones can get into them with high-quality cameras. And through internet, world over, people will be watching the agony and the struggle and eventual death, or sometimes people knocked out and dying without even knowing what's going on. They will be able to see the living hell in real time in the big high-definition television for hours and hours. I mean, just think of that. Then the world will come around and say, no, this is so terrible. I don't believe this is actually happening. We'll have to stop this right now. And the leaders who oppose to those voices, certainly will lose elections or will be replaced by somebody who would advocate peace. So, or if in the present case, if President Putin pushes the button and the result is that, then edited and recorded videos will live forever with Russia's name, with President Putin's name on it. And I don't think that we should create a world with that, like that. So anyway, because the instantaneous exposure of people to the living hell, nuclear weapons will be abolished after a nuclear confrontation develops into the actual use of nuclear weapons. So, I am predicting that if a nuclear war occurs somewhere, that will lead us to the abolition of nuclear weapons. But what the Hibakusha probably would say is that, wait, we don't want those people to die, even if it is for the sake of the abolition of nuclear weapons. So the wise thing right now is for the leaders of nuclear weapon states to see the future without nuclear weapons after any nuclear exchange occurs, and decide and to save human lives by declaring that I will not use nuclear weapons. We will adopt the no first use policy right now. So if President Putin chooses to do that, there are many different opinions, so he may not be hailed as a hero, but certainly his courage to declare that I will not use nuclear weapons would be recognized as an act of courage. So I would recommend that he'd do it.
Thank you. Just to go back to my first question, which was about Shinzo Abe and his comments about the need to embrace sort of realities. I'll just quote so that the LDP's General Council, the chair of the LDP's General Council, you probably heard this, Akiba Sensei, he also backed Shinzo Abe's call for realism in the face of threats. And of course, what they mean by threats is not just Russia, but China, North Korea. I'm sure if they're listening now, they're thinking, or they're saying even, you know, oh, these people are living in the past. Akiba Sensei is living in the past. You know, he's Heiwa Boke, to use that great Japanese expression, right? You know, the reality is that we live in a dangerous world. China's growing economic and military might makes it imperative that we think about properly defending Japan, and that includes all options, including nuclear options. Would you, this will be probably this will be the final comment, would you just care to address that argument, Akiba Sensei, the argument that's going on at the moment?
In history, there were many occasions when the right path, if that had been chosen, then we'd be in a completely different point. And with respect to China and the current situation, I believe that the stupid act by the former governor Ishihara, sort of buying Senkaku and disobeying the decision by Zhou Enlai and Tanaka, who wisely, tabled the issue until a future wiser generation would come. And Ishihara himself thought he was wiser than Zhou Enlai and Tanaka, and decided to sort of, make that into the current confrontation. If that had not occurred, situation would have been different. Well, of course, going back to a certain point in history and, making predictions from that point on to the future, that's in a sense stupid, but also we can learn something from past mistakes. And I think we should, first of all, not provocate other people into an antagonistic and adversarial sort of framework of mind. We should make a framework of the world, in which we can, talk to each other. I think we should avoid military confrontations and geopolitical thinking and so forth. Those may be, there may be room for those, but I think the emphasis should be that we should try to make the world certainly a model that the younger generation would like to aspire to make effort to reach. And for that, as a mayor, I would like to suggest that the cities can play a larger role in all of this. The point I'm trying to make is that in advocating that we should avoid war, think of cities as a political entity. Cities do not have armed forces. They do not have military. And that's, in a sense, what the Japanese Constitution is describing as an ideal state of a nation. But cities already are in that position. And that's why the network of cities worldwide would be able to do something to make the world more peaceful place. And so city network working together and as an entity that do not have armed forces and trying to influence national governments that have armed forces to sort of think outside of box to come up with better solutions for many, many problems that we face.
Thank you very much to, that's Tadatoshi Akiba, the former mayor of Hiroshima. I humbly suggest today's headline is that he has asked Prime Minister Kishida to be a hero, if he could be a hero, if he properly adopted the anti-nuclear movement. Just if you would be kind enough, Akiba-sensei, to show your petition again, the numbers for your petition. So as we said, Akiba-sensei has started a petition with Change demanding that Putin renounces threatened use of nuclear weapons. This is the tally so far. I'm sure it will grow after today's meeting, and I hope you will come back next year and tell us how the petition is going. Thank you so much to Akiba-sensei. Thank you, everybody who's looking at home.
Yeah, thank you very much. ありがとうございました。